The rain is pouring down on the cold city streets. You see a young woman, Kyeonmi, pinned to the ground. She looks small and helpless in her soaked delivery vest. Her motorcycle helmet lies cracked on the pavement nearby. Above her stands Wasin, a wealthy CEO in a suit that costs more than she makes in a year. He isn't just angry, he's cruel. He presses his heavy, expensive leather shoe down onto her hand, grinding her fingers into the hard concrete. You hear the sickening pop of her knuckles. Wasin throws his head back and laughs, a mean, loud sound that fills the air. He thinks he's just teaching a nobody a lesson. He has no idea he is stepping on a dragon. As the pain shoots up Kyeonmi's arm, she doesn't cry or beg for mercy. Instead, she stares up at him through her wet hair. Her eyes are not full of fear. They are cold and calm, like a hunter watching a trap snap shut. You realize right then that she isn't just a delivery girl. She is the secret daughter of the most powerful mafia boss in the country. She chose this simple life to be normal, but Wasin's cruelty has just woken up her lethal side. While he laughs, she is already silently counting down the minutes until his entire life is destroyed. Across the street, hidden in the shadows of the storm, a man in a black coat watches everything. He doesn't move to help, he just holds up a phone recording the CEO's every move. He is a mafia enforcer and he has just sent that video to the underworld. While Wasin is feeling powerful, his bank accounts are being emptied and his friends are turning into enemies. By the time he takes his foot off Kyeonmi's broken hand, he has already lost everything. The sky turned dark purple as a heavy, cold rain began to pour over the city. Kyeonmi pushed through the strong wind, her small scooter shaking as she drove through the flooded streets. Her yellow delivery vest was soaking wet and felt freezing against her skin. She was shivering, but she kept going. She had only one goal: to finish this last delivery and return to her quiet, hidden life. She just wanted to be a normal person where nobody knew her real name or the scary power of her family. She pulled up to the massive, glowing tower of Wasin Tech. It was a palace of glass and steel that looked down on the rest of the world. Shaking with cold, she grabbed the food bag and ran inside. The lobby was warm and smelled like expensive perfume. Her wet boots made a loud, lonely squeaking sound on the shiny white floors. "You're late," a voice barked. Sounded like a whip cracking. There stood Wasin. He was dressed in a navy suit so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. His hair was perfectly slicked back and his face was twisted into a look of pure disgust. He looked at the rain-smudged receipt in Kyeonmi's shaking hand and sneered. 6 minutes, Wasin said, stepping so close she could smell his expensive cologne. "My time is worth millions. Do you have any idea what a useless brat like you has cost me?" "I'm sorry, sir," Kyeonmi whispered, her voice trembling. "The roads were flooded." "I don't pay for excuses," Wasin screamed. He reached out and ripped the bag from her hands, throwing it onto the floor. As Kyeonmi knelt down to pick it up, his heavy, polished leather shoe shot out. He didn't just step on her hand. He slammed his heel down onto her fingers and twisted. Crunch. The sound of her bones snapping was small, but in the quiet lobby, it sounded like a gunshot. Kyeonmi's face hit the cold floor. She didn't scream, she had been trained since she was a child to hide her pain, but her eyes grew wide. A hot, burning fire of agony shot up her arm. Wasin threw his head back and laughed. It was a cruel, ugly sound. "Look at you," he mocked, grinding his shoe harder into her broken knuckles. "A little rat in a cheap vest. You belong in the gutter. Don't ever let me see your pathetic face again." Kyeonmi looked up through her wet hair. The pain was making the world spin, but deep in her eyes, something else was waking up. She wasn't looking at him like a victim anymore. She was looking at him like a hunter looks at a trap. She knew something he didn't. He hadn't just bullied a delivery girl. He had just signed his own death warrant. Across the street, a black car sat in the rain with its lights off. Inside, a man in a dark coat lowered a phone. He had recorded everything. "Master," the man whispered into the phone, his voice cold and robotic. "The CEO of Wasin Tech has spilled the dragon's blood." "What are your orders, sir?" A deep, terrifying voice answered from the other end. "Erase him. Start with his money, then take his soul." The next morning, A strange and heavy silence filled the halls of Wasan Tech. The sunlight coming through the giant windows felt cold, and the air in the office was thick with a feeling of dread. Wasan sat in his leather chair, his face pale as he stared at his phone. Something impossible was happening. His biggest investor, a billionaire who controlled half of the company's money, had vanished into thin air. No one could find him. His phone was dead, his house was empty, and even his bank accounts had been wiped clean in the middle of the night. It was as if the man had never existed. "Find him!" Wasan roared at his secretary, his voice cracking with fear. "If he doesn't show up, my company is dead by sunset." Just then the heavy office doors swung open with a loud bang. A man walked in. He didn't ask for permission. He moved with a scary robotic stillness, dressed in a long black coat that seemed to suck the light out of the room. He had a jagged scar on his cheek and one eye that was cold and fixed like a machine. Wasan jumped to his feet, his face turning red. "Who are you? How did you get past my guards?" The man didn't answer. He walked straight to the mahogany desk. The same desk where Wasan had complained about a tiny drop of rain the day before. He placed a black briefcase on the table and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was stamped with a deep red dragon seal. "My name is Soryong," the man said. His voice was a low, scary growl. "I am the new owner of your investment group. Your old partner won't be coming back. He has been retired." Wasan felt his heart drop. He recognized that red dragon. It wasn't a business logo. It was the mark of the Mafia. "What do you want?" Wasan stammered, his hands starting to shake. All his arrogance was gone. "I am here for an audit," Soryong said, leaning over the desk. He smelled like cold rain and old iron. "We looked at your books. You have been stealing money and hurting the people of this city. We don't like that." He tapped the desk with a gloved finger. "Starting right now, your bank accounts are frozen. Your stocks are locked. You don't own a single cent. You can't do this." Wasan yelled, but his voice was weak. "Yesterday you stepped on something very precious," Soryong said, his cold eye locking onto Wasan. "Today the world steps back on you." As the man turned to leave, Wasan's computer screen began to flash bright red. The company's stock was crashing so fast the numbers were a blur. Below the window, far down on the street, a delivery scooter drove by. For a second, Wasan remembered the girl's icy stare from the rain. He looked at his own hand and realized he was shaking. The first domino had fallen, and his nightmare was just beginning. The office was as quiet as a grave. Wasan sat at his desk, his eyes red and tired, staring at the empty chairs in his boardroom. The audit from that morning had frozen everything. His tech team was panicking. They said the company's computer security was unbreakable, yet his bank accounts kept dropping toward zero like a ticking clock. A soft ding came from the door. Wasan didn't even look up. "I told you no more bad news." "I have your lunch, sir." The voice was quiet, steady, and strangely familiar. Wasan froze. He looked up and saw Kyunmi standing in the doorway. She wasn't wearing her helmet this time. Her hair was still a little damp from the rain, and a clean white bandage was wrapped tightly around her right hand, the same hand he had crushed only yesterday. Wasan felt a wave of anger mixed with a cold, crawling fear. How did you get in here? My guards are supposed to keep trash like you out." Kyunmi didn't flinch. She walked forward with a strange, calm grace that made Wasan's heart beat fast against his ribs. She set a brown paper bag on his expensive desk. "The guards were busy on the phone," she said simply. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a second the CEO felt like he was being watched by a judge. "Get out," Wasan hissed, though his voice sounded weak. "I'm losing millions and you're worried about a sandwich? I should have broken your other hand too." Kyunmi leaned in closer. The smell of cold rain seemed to follow her, making the air in the warm room feel freezing. "I'm not worried about the food, Mr. Wasan. I'm worried about your security. It is very weak." She turned and walked away. Her footsteps made no sound on the carpet. Wasan wanted to scream at her to stop, but he couldn't find his voice. He looked down at the food bag she had left behind. Resting right on top was a small, shiny silver USB drive. It had a tiny red dragon carved into it. He knew he shouldn't, but he was too desperate to stop. With shaking fingers, Wasson plugged the drive into his private computer. He expected a virus. Instead, the screen turned pitch black. Then a single line of text appeared in blood-red letters. Protection cancelled. Suddenly, every camera in the building began to flicker. The secret codes of Wasson Tech began to fall apart on the screen like a ball of yarn. All his secret files, his illegal deals, and his private messages started uploading to a place he couldn't reach. Wasson lunged to pull the plug, but the computer stayed on, powered by a ghost he couldn't see. A final message popped up that made his blood run cold. You stepped on the hand that fed the city. Now we stop your heart. Far below, Kyunmi stepped out of the building and onto her scooter. She didn't look back. The delivery girl was gone. The nightmare was just getting started. Wazen's world was falling apart, and the walls of his office felt like they were closing in. He couldn't trust his computers, his banks, or even his own shadow anymore. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that red dragon symbol and the cold, calm face of the delivery girl. He was terrified. He knew the Mafia was hunting him and he needed a shield. Someone fast, dangerous, and loyal only to money. He used his last bit of secret cash to hire the best bodyguard in the city. The agency promised him a ghost, a fighter who had never failed a job. When the office doors opened that afternoon, Wasson didn't see a giant, hulking man. Instead, a young man walked in. He was lean and moved as quietly as a cat stalking its prey. He wore a simple black suit and had a calm look on his face that made the room feel suddenly very cold. "They say you're the best," Wasson said, his voice shaking as he poured a drink. "I need you to protect me. There is a girl, a delivery rider with eyes like ice. If she comes near me, I want you to finish her." The young man bowed his head slightly. "My name is Jean," he said, his voice smooth and steady. "My teacher taught me that a target is only dangerous if you let them breathe. You're safe now, Mr. Wasson. No one gets past me." Wasson let out a long, shaky breath. For the first time in 2 days he felt a little bit of his old arrogance come back. He looked at Jin's steady hands and felt powerful again. "Good. Stay right behind me. If you see her, break her legs first. I want her to crawl before she dies." Jean nodded and stepped into the shadows behind Wazen's chair. He was so still he almost seemed to disappear. Wasson was too busy feeling safe to notice the way Jean looked at the photo of Kyunmi on the desk. He didn't see the tiny hidden scar on Jin's wrist, the secret mark of the Soryang syndicate. What Wasson didn't know was that Jean wasn't just any bodyguard. Years ago, Jean had been a starving kid on the streets until a woman in a black mask saved him. She was the one who taught him how to fight and how to survive. That woman was Kyunmi. To the world, she was just a delivery girl, but to Jean she was the queen he had sworn to protect with his life. As Wasson leaned back in his chair, feeling smug and protected, Jean felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. A message appeared on the screen. "Watch him drown." Jean looked at the back of Wazen's head with eyes as cold as a grave. The CEO was smiling, thinking he had bought a shield. He had no idea he had just paid his own executioner to stand guard while the trap was finally closed. The sun rose on a morning that felt like a funeral. Inside the high-tech heart of Wasson Tech, the giant digital screens that usually showed the company's pride were bleeding. The stock market had only been open for 60 minutes, but the numbers were screaming in bright, angry red. Wasson stood in front of the monitors, his expensive silk tie pulled loose, watching his life's work vanish. "It's a glitch. Fix it," he screamed, slamming his fist against the screen. But it wasn't a glitch. For every second he had spent grinding his boot into Kyunmi's hand, millions of dollars were now evaporating. Investors were fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. His unbreakable company was being sold for pennies by invisible hands. By 10 a.m. the ticker hit a flat, dead line. 0. Wasson staggered back, his legs turning to jelly. He turned to Jean, his silent bodyguard, who was standing in the shadows of the corner. "Do something. Call the police. Call the banks." Jean didn't move. He didn't even blink. He just watched Wasson with the same cold, robotic stillness he'd had since he arrived. The silence in the room became heavy, thick with the smell of ozone and fear. Desperate to escape the suffocating air of the office, Wasson lunged for the heavy oak doors, intending to run, to hide, to beg, to find anyone who could help. But as he reached for the handle, he stopped dead. Pinned directly into the expensive wood of his office door was a delivery knife, the kind used to slice open thermal bags. The blade was buried deep, quivering from the force of the strike. Under the handle was a single piece of paper, white as a bone and stained with a red thumbprint of blood. Wason's breath came in ragged gasps as he read the words written in elegant, terrifying calligraphy. Asterisk, the time for the audit is over. The time for the debt has come. Asterisk, at the bottom was the red dragon seal, glowing like a fresh wound. He looked back at Jean, his eyes wide with a sudden, horrible realization. You were supposed to protect me. How did someone get close enough to pin this to my door? Jean finally moved. He walked slowly toward Wasson, his footsteps sounding like a heartbeat in the quiet room. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply reached out and straightened Wason's messy collar with a terrifyingly calm hand. I am protecting you, Mr. Wasson, Jean whispered, his voice as sharp as the knife in the door. I'm making sure you stay exactly where you are so you don't miss the end of the show. Wasson looked at the knife, then at the zero on the screens and finally at the cold smile on his bodyguard's face. The trap wasn't just closed, it was locked from the inside. The red ink had finished his company and now the red dragon was coming for him. The grand crystal ballroom was filled with the sparkle of gold and the sound of soft music, but to Wasson, it felt like a nightmare. He stumbled through the crowd, his face pale and covered in sweat. He was a ghost in his own world. Just yesterday these people would have done anything to be his friend. Tonight they pulled their expensive coats away as he passed as if he were a disease. He was here to beg. He needed one loan, one favor, one person to save him before he lost everything. Please listen to me, Wasson whispered, grabbing the arm of a powerful banker. The man didn't even look at him. He simply pushed Wason's hand away with a look of pure disgust. The word was out. Wasson Tech was dead and the Mafia was the one who killed it. Suddenly, the large double doors at the end of the room swung open. The room went deathly silent. The city's most powerful people, judges, politicians and billionaires, all stood up at once and bowed their heads. Wasson pushed through the crowd, desperate to see who had arrived. He thought, maybe this is my savior. Maybe this person can stop the red dragon. His heart stopped. Sitting at the very head of the long, candlelit table was a woman. She wasn't wearing a soaked delivery vest or a cracked helmet. She was dressed in a gown of midnight black silk that looked like liquid shadows. Around her neck was a necklace of blood-red rubies that glowed like fire. It was Kyeonmi. She sat perfectly still, her back straight and her face as calm as ice. Her right hand, still wrapped in a clean white bandage, rested on the table like it belonged on a throne. To her left sat the scary man with the scar. To her right stood Jean, the bodyguard Wasson had hired to protect him. Jean didn't even look at Wasson. His eyes were fixed on Kyeonmi with total respect. Wasson staggered forward, his voice a weak, shaky crawl. You're just a girl. You're a delivery rider. This has to be a joke. Someone tell me this is a joke. The rich and powerful people in the room turned to look at him. Their eyes were full of a cold, silent judgment. Kyeonmi didn't scream. She didn't get angry. She simply picked up a glass of wine with her bandaged hand and took a slow sip. When she finally looked at him, her eyes weren't full of the pain he had caused her. They were full of the power of a queen. I delivered your lunch yesterday, Mr. Wasson, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it echoed in the silent room. Tonight I am here to deliver your ending. You told me to stay in the gutter, but you forgot one thing. She leaned forward, the red rubies shining. The gutter is where the dragons hide. Wasson fell to his knees. The expensive floor felt freezing against his skin. He looked around the room and saw only cold, stony faces. He wasn't at a party. He was at a banquet for ghosts, and he was the only one about to be destroyed. Wason's mind finally snapped. The shame he felt in the ballroom turned into a desperate, poisonous madness. As Kyeonmi walked out of the gala and into the dark, quiet parking garage, Wasson was waiting in the shadows. Behind him stood 4 massive men, the last of his private guards. They were bullies with scarred faces and heavy brass knuckles, the kind of men who enjoyed hurting people. Grab her. Wasson hissed, his eyes bulging with rage. I don't care who her family is. Drag her to the warehouse. I want her to scream for what she did to my life. The four thugs moved in, circling Kyeonmi like wolves around a small lamb. She stood perfectly still next to her old, dented delivery scooter. She didn't call for help. She didn't look afraid. Instead, she slowly began to unwrap the white bandage from her right hand, letting the cloth fall to the dirty floor. Her hand was still bruised, but as she curled it into a fist, she didn't look like a delivery girl anymore. She looked like a shadow come to life. The first thug lunged forward, swinging a heavy iron pipe at her head. Kyeonmi didn't even blink. She moved so fast she was almost a blur. She stepped inside his reach and struck him hard in the neck with the edge of her hand. He dropped to his knees, clutching his throat. Before he even hit the ground, she spun around, her heel hitting the second man's jaw with a loud crack. Wasson watched, frozen, as his tough killers were broken like toys. The last two thugs rushed her at the same time, but Kyeonmi moved through them like water. She grabbed one man's wrist and twisted it until the bones snapped, the exact same sound Wasson had made her knuckles make in the rain. Then she delivered a lightning-fast kick to the last man's chest, sending him flying backward into a stone pillar. In less than 30 seconds, all four men were groaning on the ground. Kyeonmi hadn't even broken a sweat. She began walking toward Wasson, her footsteps slow and steady. Every step sounded like a heartbeat. Wasson backed away until he hit a cold brick wall, his legs shaking so hard he fell over. You're a monster, he whimpered, his voice high and thin with terror. Kyeonmi stopped just inches from his face. She reached out and gripped his chin with her bruised hand, forcing him to look into her cold, dark eyes. You called me a delivery girl, she whispered. Her voice was as sharp as a razor. So, I'm going to deliver one last thing. I'm going to deliver the truth. Your money and your power were never real. They were just masks. And tonight I've ripped them off. She let go of him and Wasson slumped into a puddle on the floor, sobbing like a child. He realized then that the girl he had tried to destroy was the most dangerous person he had ever met. He had tried to step on a bug, only to find out he had invited a dragon to burn his whole world down. The basement of Wasson Tech was a cold, concrete cage that smelled of damp dust and old oil. This was where the king had fled to hide. Wasson sat on a stack of empty crates, his expensive suit now torn and stained with the grease of the garage. The power had been cut, leaving the room in a ghostly, flickering blue light. Every sound, a dripping pipe, the scuttle of a rat, made him jump. He was no longer a CO. He was a trapped animal waiting for the hunter. The heavy steel door at the top of the stairs creaked open. A slow, rhythmic tapping sounded on the metal steps. Just clink, clink, clink. Asterisk. Kyeonmi walked into the dim light. She was back in her simple delivery vest, the yellow fabric glowing like a warning sign in the dark. In her hand she carried a familiar thermal bag. She didn't look angry. She looked bored, which was much more terrifying. I'm hungry, Wasson whispered, his voice cracking. He looked at the bag with a desperate, pathetic hope. Did you bring me something to eat? Kyeonmi didn't answer right away. She walked to a small rusted table in the center of the room and set the bag down. She opened it and pulled out a simple, cheap plastic container of noodles, the exact same meal Wasson had slapped out of her hands on that first rainy day. You told me this food was for rats, Kyeonmi said, her voice echoing off the cold walls. You said a nobody like me didn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. She pushed the container toward him. Wasson reached for it with trembling hands, but she stopped him by pressing her bandaged fingers onto the lid. On the first day, you broke my hand because I was 6 minutes late, she said, leaning into the light. Her eyes were like two black stones. You thought you were a god because you had a bank account. But look at you now. You're sitting in the dark, begging for a meal that costs $5. Wasson looked at the noodles, then up at her. He saw the cold truth in her stare. This wasn't a meal, it was a mirror. It showed him exactly how small he had become. Eat, she commanded. It wasn't a kind offer. It was an order. Wassen began to eat, the cold noodles tasting like ash in his mouth. As he swallowed, the sound of heavy engines filled the air outside. The Soryong syndicate had arrived to take what was left of his life. Hyunmi stood up and adjusted her delivery vest. She looked at him one last time, not with hate but with pity. The delivery is complete, Mr. Wassen. But the debt? That stays with you forever. She turned and walked into the shadows, leaving him alone in the basement with his cold noodles and the sound of the dragon's footsteps coming down the stairs. The cold steel doors of the basement were thrown open, not by a delivery girl but by an army. A line of black cars stretched down the block, their headlights cutting through the night like the eyes of 1,000 monsters. Wassen was dragged out into the gutter by 2 silent men in suits. He was shivering, his expensive shoes lost somewhere in the dark, and his face was smeared with the grease of his final pathetic meal. He was tossed onto the wet pavement, the same spot where he had crushed Hyunmi's hand. Please. Wassen sobbed, clutching at the air. I'll do anything. Just give me back my life. But the world wasn't listening. From the lead car a man stepped out. He was old, with silver hair and a presence that made the very air feel heavy. It was the patriarch, the head of the Soryong syndicate. He didn't even look at the broken man on the ground. Instead he looked at the entrance of the building, waiting. Hyunmi walked out. She had shed the yellow delivery vest. In its place she wore a long regal coat of deep crimson, the color of dried blood. Her bandaged hand was tucked into her pocket and her head was held high. She stood at the top of the steps, looking down at the ruined Seo who was now crying in the rain. He is nothing now, the patriarch said, his voice like grinding stones. The company is ours. The streets are ours. But they need a leader who knows the weight of $1 and the sting of a bruise. Will you take the throne, my daughter? Hyunmi looked at the city lights reflecting in the puddles. She thought about the cold nights on her scooter and the warmth of the simple people she had served. She realized she didn't have to choose between being a nobody and being a queen. She could be both. She would be the shadow that protected the weak and the fire that burned the cruel. I will take it, Hyunmi said, her voice clear and powerful. She walked down the steps, her boots clicking firmly on the ground. As she passed Wassen, she didn't stop. She didn't even look down. To her he was just a piece of trash left out for collection. Wait! Wassen screamed, reaching for her hem. Where am I supposed to go? Jean, the bodyguard who had stood by his side only to watch him fall, stepped forward and blocked his path. The same place you sent everyone else, Mr. Wassen, Jean said with a cold smile. To the bottom. The black cars began to move, whisking the new queen away toward the heart of the city. Behind them, Wassen sat alone in the rain, penniless and forgotten. The delivery girl was gone, and in her place the dragon had finally truly woken up. The city had a new master, and she knew exactly how it felt to be at the very bottom.